They thought she was timid, broke, easy to ignore. But hidden inside her cheap work shoe was a silver key, and behind that key was enough evidence to destroy one of the most powerful men in the city. Before dawn, gunmen were chasing her through Manhattan. By nightfall, she would walk back into the same restaurant in her waitress uniform and publicly expose the Mafia boss who'd built his empire on betrayal, lies, and dead men's names.
Heels. Picture the opening shot. An ancient man moves with terrifying sudden grace. One frame, a full glass of wine, cut to shattered glass across cold marble. A waiter choked against the wall by a dead-eyed grip. Heels. The gilded obsidian restaurant plunges into suffocating silence. Security freezes. Billionaires forget how to breathe. But you and I, we pan away to watch the shadows. Out of the dim lighting, a single figure steps into focus. A quiet, Heels. Unseen waitress holding a bread basket. She speaks, breathing life into a dialect dead for 40 years. Stick with me. The Greek tragedy we are dissecting tonight cuts right to the bone. Heels. We all ache for a place to belong. But the Gilded Obsidian is not merely a restaurant. It is a harsh mirror, reflecting exactly where a soul stands in this brutal food chain. Zoom in on Elena Rossi. She knows her place is the absolute bottom. Heels. She serves the powerful, stripped of identity. She drifts through the amber-lit, gold-plated room like a ghost, swallowed by an oversized uniform. She hides behind the heavy curtain of her dark hair, a fragile shield against a world built on suffering. Heels. Embracing the shadows is her only way to survive the long night. Heels. 23 years spent mastering the tragic art of disappearing. Then reality shatters the illusion. Her manager, Arthur, barks at her to grab water and bread, snapping at her to look up from the floorboards. Heels. The camera catches his fingers digging into her shoulder, pressing hard enough to leave purple bruises. She does not even blink. Absorbing the pain is simply safer. Then the dialogue shifts. The Moretti family arrives in 20 minutes. Heels. He shoves her aside with a grim warning. If she fails tonight, unemployment is a blessing. In this blood-soaked city, she will simply be erased from the script. Heels. She just whispers yes. Arthur banishes her from the VIP section, handing the Moretti table to the polished, arrogant servers. He sneers at her messy hair and bare face, mocking her total lack of grace, barking at her to stay out of the spotlight. Heels. Elena nods, quietly swallowing her pride. But Arthur completely misses the subtext. He cannot see the heavy wisdom weighing down her shoulders. In a room choked with predators and mob bosses, blending into the dark mahogany is not a weakness. Heels. It is the only way a girl like her makes it out of this tragedy alive. Heels. She grabs her pitcher and fades back into the low light, sinking into survival tactics practiced since she was 7. Behind the swinging doors, the kitchen drops to a dead, freezing cold. The normally roaring cooks are trapped in total silence. Benoit, Heels, the head chef, grips the steel counter. His face is pale, his body trembling. He catches Elena's eye, whispering through his thick accent. The son is not alone tonight. The true nightmare is walking onto our set. The patriarch himself. Heels. Don Salvatore Moretti. Heels. Time flatlines in the kitchen. A terrified line cook mutters the old man was supposedly exiled in Sicily, or dying in a bed somewhere. Benoit wipes cold sweat from his brow. Men like Salvatore Moretti do not just die. Heels, he murmurs. They just go down to manage hell. Pure panic floods the tight space. Benoit warns that one wrong grain of salt or a spilled glass is a literal death sentence. Amid the chaos, Elena calmly picks up a heavy silver tray. Heels. Do not pour his drink with your left hand, she says quietly. The room freezes. The Don hates the left hand. Heels. An old superstition, she adds. She tells them to warn the server. Benoit just stares, lost, demanding how a nobody knows dark mob secrets. Elena shrugs, feeding him a cheap lie about reading history books. Heels. The real truth is buried much deeper. Flashback to a freezing Brooklyn apartment, her grandmother whispering those bloody stories in a dead dialect meant for ghosts. Stepping back into the dining room, the camera pans across the fallout. Heels. Tech founders and finance guys are already fleeing the scene, bolting into the cold night before dessert is even served. Heels. Let us pause and analyze this scene together, shall we? When an apex predator enters the frame, the smaller animals instinctively scatter. It is not just fear, it is raw survival. You simply do not breathe the same air as the devil. Heels. Elena quietly clears plates, her eyes locked on the heavy oak doors. A suffocating knot forms in her chest. It is a sorrow much heavier than panic, echoing her grandmother's tragic warnings. Across the empty floor, Arthur violently snaps his fingers. feels, ordering her to vanish. She silently obeys, retreating back into the dark, shadowy wood of the walls. Feels. She dissolves into the architecture. That is the tragic gift of being truly invisible. At 8 sharp, the mass doors groan open like a crypt. 4 silent muscle men enter, shoving right past the host. Their dead eyes scan the lighting, feels, tracking exits, sizing up the trembling patrons. Satisfied, they step aside. Lorenzo Moretti walks into the harsh spotlight. The man is massive, carrying a crushing gravity that practically forces the room to its knees. Dressed in sharp navy, heels, his face is pure, unforgiving ice. He projects the devastating aura of a sun raised in absolute darkness. Heels. He moves without a shred of doubt, walking as if the marble was paved for him. But the true nightmare enters right beside him. The room is not shaking for Lorenzo. They are paralyzed by the fragile old man gripping his arm. Heels. Don Salvatore Moretti is half his son's size. Time has chewed him up, bending his spine, carving tragic, harsh lines into his face. Buried under a dark fedora and thick cashmere, he leans on a wooden cane. But do not fool yourself, Eels. The cane is merely a stage prop. Everyone breathing knows the ugly, bloody truth. Eels. This fragile old man once took a life with his bare hands on a crowded street in 1979, calmly sipping espresso while the dark blood pooled. His sheer presence feels like a suffocating storm. The entire dining hall surrenders. Eels. Dialogue stops. Forks hit the plates. Extras in the background stop breathing. The silence is so heavy, Elena feels it crushing her skull. Sprinting into the frame, Arthur bows deep enough to scrape the floorboards. He pours out pathetic flattery, Eels, swearing it is an absolute honor to host the Morettis, promising their table is waiting. Eels. He guarantees a perfect scene. Salvatore completely ignores him. The old man just grunts, his cane striking the marble like a slow, dying heartbeat. Lorenzo gives the sweating manager one cold nod, politeness, masking a silent promise of violence. Eels. Is the table ready? Lorenzo asks. Arthur scrambles, swearing it is the safest mark in the building. Lorenzo quietly tells him to lead the way. From her dark, shadowed corner, Elena watches closely. She studies Salvatore's weary steps, Eels, his white-knuckled grip on the wood, realizing this broken king is not holding on for balance. He is holding on to power. Eels. She watches his hollow eyes scan the room. That is a tragic king surveying his stolen empire. Elena feels a haunting familiarity in his posture, pulled from the ghosts of her past. Her grandmother used to drink cheap wine at 2 a.m, Eels, whispering that Salvatore walked like the entire underworld rested on his broken spine. Every step was collecting a dark blood debt. Elena grips her pitcher, telling herself to cut away. Eels. You and I both know the terrible pull of a slow-motion car crash. We cannot look away. The Morettis finally take their seats. Eels. The guards lock down the perimeter like a silent marching army. Lorenzo sits beside his father, a dark prince chained to a bloody throne. The table setting is perfect, but in a brutal twist of the script, Arthur sends Chad to serve them. Eels. Chad is a clueless kid who knows absolutely nothing of Sicilian mob rules. He steps into the shot with goofy, bright energy, totally blind to the ancient monsters sitting there, men who built empires of bone before he was even born. From the dark, Eels. Elena watches this innocent lamb walk right into the slaughterhouse. Eels. Chad flashes a painful plastic customer service smile. Good evening, he chirps cheerfully. Sparkling water, a massive fatal mistake. Salvatore has not taken off his hat yet. In their tragic world, nobody speaks until the boss uncovers his head. Eels. It is a blood rule, and Chad just shattered it. The camera pushes in on Lorenzo clenching his jaw, pure violence boiling under his tailored skin. Salvatore just stares at the waiter in dead, heavy silence. He is not looking at a human being. Eels. He is looking at a broken toy making a noise that desperately needs to stop. Eels. Chad starts drowning in visible panic. He stumbles through a weak apology, but Lorenzo coldly cuts the dialogue, asking for still water in the wine list. But the kid keeps digging his own grave, actually trying to upsell a Pinot Noir. Salvatore growls. Eels. Do I look like I drink Pinot Noir? He does not yell, he whispers it. A terrifying textured sound packed with decades of raw violence. Chad turns ghost white, physically shaking in the frame. The ancient crime boss just raises one hand, Eels, dismissing him entirely. Arthur drags the kid away, spitting curses, tossing him out into the cold night. Eels. They send in Dominic, a seasoned server who supposedly knows how to handle these Mafia elites. He steps up to pour the water, but he makes a tragic, fatal mistake. He pours from the left. Watching from the deep shadows, Elena physically aches. Eels. She can feel the incoming violence building in the room. Salvatore's hand snaps out, crushing the man's wrist with terrifying, brutal speed. Water shatters across the expensive table. The Don growls that in his house you pour with the right hand, heals. The left belongs to the devil. Dominic just freezes, pathetic, begging for his life, heals. Dominic stammers some pathetic, trembling excuse about restaurant policy. It is the ultimate fatal mistake. Salvatore drops his wrist, cinematic disgust. Policy? He spits, warning them he is not some clueless tourist. Lorenzo reaches out, heals, desperately trying to soothe his father's bleeding ego, but the mob boss is pushed too far. He stands up, his heavy voice echoing off the acoustic walls. He damns the restaurant as cheap plastic, entirely stripped of actual respect. Fake respect, heals, he roars, is just a hollow grave. Behind him, the shadowed enforcers shift their weight, completely ready for an all-out war. Heals. You and I both know the exact feeling when a room turns fatal. The manager is frozen. Cold steel slides into the hands of the mob enforcers. Diners hold their breath, trapped with a wounded predator. Don Salvatore turns to leave, a departure guaranteeing tragedy. But then Elena moves. Swallowing her terror, she steps into the harsh kitchen light. She takes the cheap staff bread, hidden from the elite, and grabs a simple bottle of oil off the shelf. Heals. No imported truffles, just raw, earthly truth. She steps into the suffocating silence. The manager glares with pure malice, but the restaurant means nothing now. A deeper tragedy calls to her. Suddenly, a hulking enforcer blocks her path, built like a concrete wall, bearing a vicious scar and a killer's hands. He stands between her and the grieving crime boss, ready to break a young waitress over warm bread. Heals. Elena pauses, tilting her head. Not surrender, but a profound sign of underworld respect. She whispers she brought bread for the Don. The guard studies her, no trembling, just an ocean of calm. 3 agonizing seconds tick by before he finally steps aside. Elena walks to the table. Lorenzo locks his dark eyes on her. He knows the look of greed, but her presence carries a totally different, heavy gravity. Heals. She stands center stage, yet craves the shadows. That visual paradox hooks Lorenzo immediately. Meanwhile, Salvatore stews in dark fury, ready to spark a Mafia street war. Elena ignores the lethal sun. Her gaze anchors entirely on the broken boss. She sets the bread down like a sacred offering. Pouring the oil, she shifts his wine glass exactly 3 inches, aligning it perfectly with his blade. A quiet, devastating display of power. Heals. The manager groans from the shadows, waiting for blood to spill, trembling hands taking a breath for risking everything. Tension hangs like a thick fog. She knows this is her salvation, or her absolute last breath. Bowing her head, she speaks. Vucenza beneda don turi, upani e kauru, mancha escordali penny. This isn't modern Italian, it is a buried dialect, sung by peasants to soothe violent lords of a bygone lifetime. Heals. It means, bless me, the bread is warm, eat and forget your sorrows. The energy shift is haunting. Salvat's boss looks completely paralyzed, caught between shock and an agonizing vulnerability. Watching this hardened killer unravel is deeply unsettling. He sinks back into his chair, staring at Elena as if she walked out of a grave. Lorenzo goes rigid, watching a waitress deliver a sacred phrase meant only for the ghosts of underworld legends. Heals. Here is where you and I witness the shift. A suffocating silence floods the room. What did you say? Salvatore whispers. His terrifying aura vanishes, leaving only a broken man. Elena speaks again, matching the exact heals, mournful rhythm her grandmother passed down. She holds the syllables like fragile glass, warning that cold bread and anger invite the devil. Salvatore reaches out, his calloused hand trembling violently. He stops inches away, heals, terrified she might fade into smoke. His voice cracks, begging to know who taught her those words. Heals. My grandmother taught me, Elena answers. Switching to English, she keeps that haunting, ancient cadence. Then she delivers a devastating truth. She tells him it is the language meant for God, and for men who believe they are God. Heals. The silence completely transforms. Pure terror vanishes, replaced by a heavy, ancient reverence. Lorenzo exhales sharply. He stares at this girl in her cheap uniform offering broken bread. For the first time, Heals, the calculated air is entirely lost in the dark, and he is mesmerized. Heals. Salvatore sounds like a drowning man grasping for air. What was her name? He asks. Elena stands on the razor edge of life. She could lie, vanish, and keep her ghost story buried. She sees a human rotting from grief. The agony pulls at her soul. She surrenders the truth. Grazia, she whispers. Grazia Vitapali. The name detonates through the silence. The grieving Don grips the oak table just to stay upright. Heals. Blood drains from his face. Grazia, he repeats, tumbling 50 years into the dark past. The baker's daughter who vanished in 1974. Elena stands perfectly still, delivering the truth. She never vanished. She ran to Brooklyn. Heals. Baked bread for decades and passed away 3 years ago. Elena lived this moment in her nightmares, never expecting it to be real. A single tear falls from Salvatore's eye. Watching the ultimate crime lord weep before his soldiers is a beautiful, Heals, deeply human tragedy. Heals. Lorenzo, the cold underboss, is shaken by his father's tears has shifted. Salvatore takes the bread, tearing the crust exactly as his grandmother did. He dips it, tastes it, and whispers that it tastes like home. He's conversing with the dead. Suddenly his dark eyes snap open, locking onto the trembling manager. The ruthless boss returns, radiating fierce protection. You, he growls. This girl serves no one tonight. She eats with my family. Heals. Arthur stumbles, nervously citing rules about staff sitting with patrons. Lorenzo slowly turns. He doesn't raise his voice. He murmurs. Arthur, my father just invited a lady to dinner. Are you telling him no? The manager shrinks in truth. Lorenzo tells Elena to sit. She stands paralyzed. The heavy reality of the vendetta she just woke is crashing down. She stepped from the shadows, invoked the sacred dialect, and whispered a name buried in blood. Heals. The door to her old life is nailed shut. She mutters about finishing her shift, but Lorenzo stands. Up close, its towering shadows smelling of bitter tobacco and quiet violence. He pulls back the chair beside his father. He isn't asking. Lowering his voice, he whispers, Elena, nobody refuses Don Salvatore. His gaze cuts right through her. No cheap charm. Just a pure, dark obsession taking root, dragging her into the deep end. Heals. It is a quiet, deadly curiosity, far more terrifying than a gun. Lorenzo leans close, asking how a Manhattan waitress speaks a dead Sicilian dialect from 1942. Elena stares at the empty chair. Her survival relies on reading the darkness. Sitting here seals her fate. Yet she glances at the aging Don. He watches her like a priceless memory dragged from the ashes, utterly terrified she might fade away. Heals. She unties her apron, letting it drop, and sits beside Don Salvatore. A fearful gasp sweeps the dining room. Lorenzo sits close, pouring a vintage wine worth more than her life. His eyes study her every breath. Meanwhile, light returns to Salvatore's face. The grief lifts. He leans in, desperate to hear about her grandmother's kitchen. He asks if she remembers the harvest songs from their village, long before the streets ran red with blood. Heals. He asks how Grazia dried tomatoes under the Mediterranean sun. As Elena answers, her mask falls. Speaking the rhythm of the old country, she isn't an invisible servant anymore. She is Grazia Vitali's blood, a name carrying the weight of empires. But what do you and I make of Lorenzo? Completely silent, he dissects her syllables like a predator, mapping a hunt, swirling his wine. He levels a cold stare that strips her soul to its core. Heals. So Grazia runs in 1974, he says, testing her defenses. My father was a crime soldier then. People didn't vanish without reason. Elena insists she wanted to start. Lorenzo smiles. That is a lie, he murmurs. But you have beautiful eyes when you lie, so I will let it slide. She fiercely defends her truth. He slams his glass down. Grazia didn't run from boredom. She ran because she saw, knew, or stole something. Heals. Women didn't just run. They ran because staying guaranteed a quiet funeral. The Don growls his son's name, a warning. Lorenzo leans in anyway. That greeting? Not bakery slang. That's the blood code. Old families used it to talk through federal wiretaps while cops heard dead air. Elena grips the tablecloth, her pulse hammering in her throat. Heals. A baker's daughter might know old folk songs. Lorenzo presses, studying her shadowed, fearful eyes. But she doesn't know the respect code for a Don. Who are you? The fragile silence shatters. The heavy doors violently burst inward, a vulgar, deafening desecration of tradition. 6 towering Russian enforcers in thick leather flood into the sacred, dimly lit dining room. Heals. You and I are watching a familiar dark tragedy unfold. At its center stands Dmitry Vulov, a towering figure daring the room to draw a single breath. He scans the tense shadows, fixing his venomous grin on the patriarch's table. Don Salvatore, he mocks, approaching slowly. I didn't realize you still dined with the help. His hollow stare drags over Elena. Lorenzo rises, unfolding with the terrifying grace of a snapping switchblade. Heals. He fastens his suit jacket with an agonizingly slow, deliberate rhythm. Dmitri, Lorenzo states, his tone completely dead and hollow. Interrupting my father's dinner is a fatal mistake. Vulov chuckles, heels, his brutes fanning out as Moretti soldiers step from the gloom. The room grows bone-chillingly cold. Vulov reaches for Elena's his wrist. A sickening crunch of bone echoes. Touch her, Lorenzo whispers, heels, an agonizingly intimate threat, and you lose the hand, then the arm, then your life. Heels. Fury burns in Vulov's cold eyes. He jerks his arm back, but Lorenzo's grip is locked in an ironclad rage. Protecting a waitress? You've gone soft. Slowly, Don Salvatore stands up, heels. His frail frame carries the crushing exhaustion of a man who stopped playing games 30 years ago. She isn't a waitress, Salvatore rasps, his gaze completely dead. She eats at my table. She carries Sicilian blood, Corleone blood, heels. He stares right through her trembling silhouette, breathing painful life into a decades-old Mafia tragedy. Heels. Notice the suffocating pressure choking the room. Slicing through that heavy dead air, Elena utters an ancient underworld proverb. He who disturbs the bread dies of hunger. Her tone drips with tragic sorrow and unbreakable iron. Salvatore freezes, heels, completely struck by this phantom memory. An unforgiving, familiar shadow eclipses his weathered face. Exactly, he murmurs, waving a trembling, dismissive hand. Get this trash out of here. In chilling unison, heels, the Moretti guards raise their weapons, soulless men turning the bloody gears of the crime family. Heels. Vulov eyes the raised barrels, scanning his crew and calculating the grim arithmetic of death. Ripping his arm from Lorenzo's grasp, his toxic, dead-eyed stare hardens. The polite veneer crumbles entirely, heels, leaving nothing but the absolute guarantee of slaughter. We're not done, Moretti, Vulov spits, aiming a rigid finger at Elena. And you, kid, you just picked out a casket. He retreats into the freezing urban decay. The heavy doors slam shut, heels, and a devastating, suffocating silence buries the room for 3 agonizing seconds. Heels. The suffocating tension slightly exhales. Lorenzo sinks into his velvet chair, dissecting her every micro-expression, the twitchy, inherited paranoia of a Mafia prince wars with a newfound grim reverence. You know the old ways, he murmurs. Heels. Who taught you? Elena lowers her gaze, crushed beneath the weight of her tragic history. My father. Lorenzo hesitates, a hairline fracture in his icy composure. I thought your grandmother raised you. She did, Elena replies, unflinching. Heels. After they murdered my dad. The silence shifts entirely. No longer a standoff, but the desolate stillness of an open grave. Heels. It is the terrifying descent into a point of no return. Who exactly was your father? The Don breathes, his voice trembling with a pathetic sudden depression. Elena studies the two men. Her primal survival instincts scream in terror. Heels. She spent her entire tragic childhood memorizing blood codes for this exact nightmare. But the devastating truth anchors her. She is completely exposed. Vulov saw her face. The rival boss heard the sacred words. Heels. There is no quiet escape through the back door. The shadows can no longer protect her. Heels. My father was Santino Vitale, she declares, standing firm with the grace of a doomed martyr. But you probably called him the ghost. The devastating revelation shatters the room. Don Salvatore drops his silverware, heels the metallic clatter, slicing the dead air. The aging patriarch stares as if a dead man walked in, his knuckles turning a painful white against the mahogany. Santino, he exhales, heels, like a drowning victim finally breaching the surface after 20 agonizing years. My best friend, my closest advisor. Raw, unhealed grief fractures his voice. The man who sold you out, Lorenzo slices in, brutally cold. Heels. Back in 1985, Lorenzo adds, observing his father's tragic unraveling. He never betrayed you, Elena snaps. She has dragged this crushing psychological luggage her entire life. Heels. Waiting to face the man who let her father's legacy rot in the dirt. He died keeping your secrets, Don Turi. He died keeping you safe. Let us look at this closely, you and I. Those haunting words completely rewrite the syndicate's bloody history. Heels. Salvatore remains paralyzed. He cannot speak, merely gripping the wood with trembling hands, gasping and weeping. A broken patriarch crawling out from beneath 20 years of suffocating toxic guilt. Heels. Lorenzo shatters the emotional spell. That is a dangerously tragic story, he warns, his expression hardening into cold marble. Claiming Santino never turned on the family? That unravels everything. Good men and bled because of 1985. Heels. I know what it cost, Elena replies softly. Then you realize if you are lying, you do not leave this room alive. Lorenzo, the Don rasps, his tone choked with profound grief. No, Dad, Lorenzo snaps back. We require facts. Vulov knows her face now. Heels. The rival faction heard the blood code. Her quiet life is dead. The crosshairs are already locked on her heels. She will either save our bloodline or burn us to ash, and I need answers tonight. Lorenzo glares, masking the cold terror beneath his skin. I am asking once, what do you have, and how? Elena holds his piercing gaze. Heels. She witnesses the crushing burden of a future boss, playing a brutal game of underworld chess, weighing her fragile life against his syndicate's survival. My grandmother left me the absolute proof, Elena murmurs softly. Right before she passed, Heels. She poured a glass of red wine and confessed the horrific truth. Keeping that dark secret for 18 years was literally devouring her alive. What proof? Lorenzo demands. Heels. A key? A hidden safe? My father poured 5 agonizings into a ledger, she explains, tracking every filthy deal, because a rat in your circle was feeding the feds. That traitor wanted the lucrative smuggling routes for himself. Heels. My father was days away from saving you when they slaughtered him. Righteous fury ignites the dawn. They swore he stole our cash and fled to Brazil. He never left New York, Elena whispers, twisting the emotional blade deeper. He's in Queens, Heels. Grave 114, buried under a false name so the cartel couldn't desecrate his grave. Heels. She visited that freezing headstone every Sunday for 30 years, leaving bread and silent prayers, she adds, her voice fracturing. The room descends into absolute silence. The terrifying mob boss weeps openly now, Heels, covering his trembling mouth with an aged hand. Witnessing a Mafia god crumble beneath that magnitude of unadulterated grief alters the very gravity of the room. Lorenzo softly shatters the trance. Where is the key? Queens, Elena replies. Heels, her eyes blazing with stubborn fire. Sewn inside the lining of my winter coat. It opens box 404 on Wall Street, untouched since 1984. Paid for with bakery tips, year after brutal year. Heels. She hid those deposit slips in a rusted coffee can, carrying the secret to her grave. Lorenzo leans back, exchanging a quiet, entirely gutted stare with his father. Heels. The deadly gears grind in their minds as the horrific truth sets in. The mob war has already begun. We strike Queens tonight, Lorenzo commands. No, we wait, Salvatore rasps, his tone anchored by tragic weight. Vulov is hunting. He memorized her face. Heels. His shooters will breach her apartment in minutes. Blind fury only digs early graves. The Don shakes his head. We move at dawn. Lorenzo surveys the dim room, silently calculating tomorrow's devastating body count. Heels. Elena senses the violent hurricane brewing beneath his ribs. He is mapping out the imminent bloodbath, a man whose natural instinct is to dive headfirst into the flames. Yet the crushing tragedy of the evening chains him to the floor. Dawn it is, Heels. We bring the heavy hitters. He stands adjusting his jacket, studying Elena not as a stranger, but as a profoundly scarred survivor he must decipher. In his eyes, she is suddenly underworld royalty. You stay here tonight, he commands softly. Heels, leaving zero oxygen for debate. I have a bakery shift tomorrow, Elena argues, desperately clinging to a mundane life that has already evaporated. Heels. Lorenzo studies her for 2 agonizing beats. He turns to Arthur, the manager, visibly drowning in a cold sweat. Arthur, Lorenzo murmurs, his tone chillingly smooth. Elena is taking tomorrow off. Arthur nods in pure terror. Absolutely. Heels. Make it permanent, Lorenzo orders. Elena stares down at her discarded uniform apron. She casts one final haunting look across the dining room. 3 years of pouring water, memorizing mundane orders, burying her bloodline just to stay invisible. Heels. That safe, quiet illusion is completely shattered. Heels. Tonight you and I ride into the abyss with them. 3 blacked-out vehicles tear through the frozen midnight streets. No radio chatter, just suffocating silence and heavily armed men. Elena sits wedged beside Lorenzo. Up front, Heels. Don Salvatore rides shotgun, staring deeply into the bleeding shadows. 20 agonizing minutes drag by. Then, without turning his head, the old Don finally speaks. Your grandmother baked bread on Thursdays, Heels. The whole block smelled that rosemary crust. I walked by just to breathe it in. You have to ask yourself, will this tragic memory finally expose the rat, or is this another deadly trap? Heels. The heartbreak here runs so deep it aches. Salvatore, the brutal mob boss, admits his deadliest enforcer, Santino Vitale, secretly loved Elena's grandmother. A guy who survived endless gunfights melted for a baker's daughter. She chose a quiet teacher instead. When that teacher died, Santino vanished to Brooklyn before the grave was even covered. In the backseat, Elena sits paralyzed. The enforcer never whispered his agony. He simply dragged his broken heart into the shadows. Heels. Salvatore drops a devastating truth. For decades, he believed his right-hand man betrayed the family. But his most loyal soldier died protecting them, while Salvatore cursed his name. Imagine the crushing weight of that guilt. The old boss whispers how this regret is a jagged rock in his chest, a shard of glass he cannot swallow, pure, breathless agony. In the dark car, Lorenzo gently brushes Elena's arm, offering a quiet anchor in a drowning sea of grief. Feels. That touch is not romance. It is silent solidarity under crushing pressure. Lorenzo swears they will uncover the truth. They arrive at the family's in Iron Fortress. Cameras pan slowly. Dim lanterns stretch long shadows across cold cobblestones. Elena poured wine for wealthy people for years, but this is different. This is blood money. The mansion looks gorgeous, but the heavy air chokes you with ancient power and generations of buried sins. Feels. Inside, an old maid named Maria waits. Her tired eyes hold 100 silent tragedies. Salvatore barks a harsh order to dress Elena, but Ella refuses. She plants her feet in the foyer and delivers a stone-cold no. Maria blinks at the pure defiance. Halfway up the massive staircase, Lorenzo freezes. He stares down at her, torn between violent anger and respect for her reckless courage. Feels. Elena holds her ground. Her voice shakes but never breaks. She calls the uniform her anchor, pressing a finger to the cheap plastic name tag. Her grandmother wrote her name on the back, a desperate plea to remember who she is inside a house of monsters. She is keeping it. The room's silence turns thick and suffocating. Slowly, Lorenzo descends the stairs. He steps uncomfortably close, invading her personal space until the air between them practically burns. Feels. They stand so close she sees the stubble on his jaw. His dark eyes pierce her. Lorenzo murmurs that she is relentlessly stubborn. She fires back, claiming she is just practical. Then, Lorenzo twists the knife. He whispers she sounds exactly like her father. That single sentence shatters her walls. It hits like a physical punch to the ribs. The crushing weight of that comparison leaves her completely breathless. Feels. Let's look closer at this pain together. Lorenzo remembers being 12, watching Santino tear his father's plans apart with brutal honesty, and Santino was never wrong. Lorenzo softly explains that in their violent world, a friend is a blood oath. It is the man you take a bullet for, or the ghost you carry until you die. Elena just stares. Her chest aches, reading the raw sorrow in his dark eyes. She grasps the agonizing depth of this endless vendetta. Feels. All her life, Elena ran from men like this, haunted by the blood they leave behind. Yet inside their fortress, she finally drops the act of the helpless girl. It is a huge shift, though the pure terror eats at her. Lorenzo quietly tells her to rest before dawn brings chaos, then steps away. But she will not sleep. She lies awake in the dark, staring upward, listening to the crushing silence of a house built on graves. Feels. The silence is deafening. No city traffic, just the mournful ocean wind. Her instincts spark, sensing a shadow on the cold balcony. Stepping outside, she finds Lorenzo, jacket off, tie undone, nursing dark whiskey, staring at the black waves. For one fragile second, he is a broken man, not a ruthless boss. He softly warns her inside, mentioning snipers. Snipers? Elena snaps back, asking why he risks his own life out in the open. Feels. Lorenzo flashes a bitter smirk, whispering he is too stubborn to die. Elena ignores the chill, asking how long he has carried this crushing empire. So drops his armor. He confesses taking over at 19, right after his father's heart failed. He tried fixing a few messy problems, and the nightmare never stopped. Then he asks a heavy question. Before this tragedy swallowed her, before the mob dragged her into darkness, what was her quiet dream? Feels. Elena looks away, her voice fragile. She just wanted a small bakery, like her grandma's. Lorenzo lets out a hollow, tragic laugh. He outlines the twisted poetry of their bloodlines. Her grandmother fled the Mafia to bake bread. Her father built an empire of corpses to keep her safe. And the heir to this bloodshed? She just wants to bake. The cruel cycle of violence is agonizing. Feels. Lorenzo goes totally quiet. He asks why she hid in the shadows while holding the keys to the kingdom. Elena finally cracks. She admits the constant paranoia completely ruined her grandmother. Every ringing phone, every strange car outside sparked pure terror. Elena just wanted a boring, invisible life to escape that inherited trauma. But the fantasy is dead. The ruthless Vulov has her face. The syndicate knows her name, and her sanctuary is ashes. Now there is nothing left but raw, brutal survival. Feels. So what do you and I make of this tragedy? What is left for her? Elena whispers she is breathing borrowed time. Lorenzo studies her with dark respect. He murmurs she blew her perfect cover to save a dying. Where cowards run, she stepped into the crossfire. But he softly warns she fears the wrong ghosts. When she asks what to truly fear, Lorenzo's voice drops to a chilling whisper. Me. Is he her savior or her executioner? Heals. Lorenzo hesitates. His hardened exterior slips a fraction. I don't know yet, he confesses to the cold wind. Most honest thing I can tell you. Elena offers a weary, brave smirk. Good, dishonest men are boring. Against all logic, heals. Lorenzo actually smiles, not the cold grin of an exhausted, lonely man. For one heartbeat, he is perfectly human, but their broken world denies them peace. His radio violently crackles. Talk, he barks, heals. A panicked voice floods the channel. Boss, movement out in Queens, Volov's cars. They breached the perimeter 20 minutes ago. Heals. The warmth instantly vanishes. The ruthless boss who carried the syndicate on his shoulders is back. Contain it, Lorenzo orders. No shooting, just watch. We move at 5. He turns a dark stare toward Elena. They are tearing apart your apartment, heals. Elena never flinches. The key isn't there. Lorenzo pauses. You said you sewed it into your coat. I know what I said. Lorenzo stares, a profound realization hitting him. Where is it? Slowly. Elena reaches down. She still wears those battered heels, non-slip waitress shoes, the worn-out sneakers she walked in every day, the one thing that never betrayed her. Heels. She bends down, unlaces her left shoe, and peels the heel back. Inside the rubber, wrapped in her grandmother's wax paper, sits a tiny silver key. Lorenzo just stares, 3 brutal seconds of dead air. He lets out a hollow sound, half laugh, feels, half groan, burying his face in his hands. You lied. Elena shrugs. My grandma taught me, never keep your diamonds in the jewelry box. First place they check. Lorenzo drops his hand, staring in awe. Feels. It is the helpless shock of a hardened boss realizing he plays checkers while she plays chess. Feels. Your grandma, Lorenzo says, completely serious, was a terrifying woman. She was a baker, Elena snaps. She baked bread and kept receipts. Lorenzo pulls in a ragged breath. He eyes the key, grabs his radio, and calls it in. All right, new plan. Feels. Vulov's men are destroying your apartment for a key sitting right here. They think they are winning, which gives us a small window. He squares his shoulders. You trust me? Elena never blinks. I trust our goals align right now, she replies. Feels heavily guarded. That works, Lorenzo nods. Feels. Stick with me. This is where the story turns cold. They move fast. Elena sits in her faded uniform, clutching her grandma's note to block generational trauma. Lorenzo wears tactical gear beneath his suit, a walking symbol of Mafia violence. Heavy trucks tear through the dark city while Elena grips that key. Haunted by a father buried under a stolen identity, she knows his hidden truth inside a Wall Street bank is finally coming into the light. Feels. Carrying a ghost for 20 years fractures the soul. The key burns her palm until a sniper's bullet shatters the glass. The violence demands a toll. Get down! Renzo tackles Elena to the floorboards. He shields her trembling frame, driven by violent instincts bred into crime families. The driver screams coordinates as backup cars swerve defensively. Give me a count. How many? Lorenzo snaps into his earpiece, his voice dead cold. Feels. Picture this. 3 cars, sniper up top, they knew, boss. Lorenzo tightens his jaw, studying Elena in the shadow, but she holds firm. You good? He asks. Ask me when the shooting stops, she breathes. He smirks. Stay down. The truck jerks as bullets shred the roof. Volov needs them breathing. Dead bodies are useless to him. Living hostages are leverage. Feels. Knowing Volov's mind buys them 40 seconds. 2 blocks out. Lorenzo cuts the driver off. Absolute chaos. The truck slides into a packed street. Lorenzo grabs Elena. Ditch the ride. Stick close. They bail into the freezing night, vanishing into the crowd as his men form a wall. She shadows his every step. Falling behind means a lonely, forgotten death. Feels. Her grandmother raised her for this nightmare. After 3 blocks, the radio hisses, Boss. Lorenzo holds her gaze. They're tearing your life apart. They won't find it, she whispers. I know, he murmurs, eyeing her grip on the key. But we need Wall Street, and Vulov owns the roads. He taps his ear. Marco, ghost route to the bank. Now. Feels. No bridges, no tunnels, something. Dead silence. Then Marco answers. The river. Private dock 2 blocks south. 20 minutes by water. Lock it in. We move in 5. Stares at him. You just have a boat? I have options. A faint smile breaks until the reality of her ruined home crashes down. My photos, she whispers. Grandma's recipes. Feels. All in a notebook. Lorenzo feels the heavy pain of her lost history. We'll return for what matters. If they burn it, we rewrite it. His voice is a firm anchor. Her lessons are up here. He taps his head. They can't take that. She nods, clutching the key. The ride across the black water is freezing. Elena braces against the wind, consumed by her father's dark revenge. Feels. Let's look at this together. She only knew her father through stories and a rusted key. A ghost murdered before he could expose the city. Now she inherits his violent war. They hit the Manhattan docks, met by silent muscle. Walking the dead financial district, their footsteps echo like a heartbeat. The massive bank sits pitch black. Lorenzo checks his time, nodding to a shadow at the door. Feels. Tell me you brought the manager. He's inside, very cooperative. Elena doesn't ask how anyone gets cooperative at 4 in the morning. She finally sees the truth. A shadow world breathes under the pavement, fueled by blood money. She served these monsters dinner for years, completely blind. The vault smells like coal dust. A shaking manager leads them down the hall, staring at the floor. Feels. Lorenzo keys box 404. Elena's shaking hand pushes hers home. A heavy click echoes. He sets the box down. 20 years of silence fills the room. She pries it open. No cash. No diamonds. Just a worn ledger and a cassette tape. Then, the heartbreak. She recognizes her dad's rushed handwriting instantly. A ghost from one faded birthday card. Feels. The writing is painfully small. She touches the tape, frozen by its weight. Lorenzo flips the ledger, scanning decades of mob sins. Suddenly he freezes. Elena. His voice actually cracks, his armor gone. Look at this. He slides the book over, pointing to a column of initials and dates. 1983, 1984, 1985. Feels. Beside the dates sits a trail of shipments and one name. Divivulov, Lorenzo whispers. Look here. Leans in. Her dad logged every FBI meeting. The betrayal is suffocating. At the bottom, underlined twice, sits one chilling warning. She reads it, shaking. He will blame the ghost when the time comes. The ghost already knows. Feels. The ghost prepared the answer. If you read this, the answer found you. Dead silence. Lorenzo watches her. Your dad knew, he whispers. He knew Vulov would frame him. He built this for you. Her voice breaks. He died 3 weeks after I was born. Lorenzo doesn't blink. He knew you'd be here. Feels. He knew she'd protect the key. He wrote this tragedy for whoever came looking. For you, the vault is freezing. She touches the faded ink, then locks the grief away. Her eyes harden with pure vengeance. The tape. We need a player. Marco has one. Lorenzo says softly, wrapping the ledger. Feels. Stick with me. Lorenzo is cold, but this revenge just got personable. His radio hisses. Boss, Marco warns. Massive problem. Vulov called an emergency obsidian. All 5 families. Lorenzo freezes. Knows we have the box. Yeah, Marco agrees. They found the apartment. He knows Elena's with you. Feels. Vulov wants to spin the story before the truth drops. Lorenzo studies Elena, running on cold logic. He eyes her waitress uniform and smirks. He's heading to the Gilded Obsidian, so are we. He realizes the irony. Every boss Vulov betrayed in 1985 will be there. Every man who lost his freedom because that rat sold them out. Feels. Drop this evidence. Vulov is dead. Elena frowns. He'll have an army. He'll say we faked the ledger. Lorenzo stares at her. Exactly. That's why you dropped the bomb. The ghost's daughter, speaking their old dialect. It's a brilliant trap. They'll believe a waitress before some power-hungry rival. Feels. Elena lets the silence hang. For 3 years, she was a ghost pouring wine, absorbing the syndicate's darkest secrets. She pictures her father's frantic handwriting, and her grandmother pressing that key into her palm, whispering, "Remember the name I gave you." A cold resolve locks into her chest. She looks up. "I'll need my uniform pressed," she whispers. Feels. Lorenzo nods. Done. Vulov has no idea his Reaper walks through those doors tonight. In the Sif house, they hit play on a cassette deck. Voices slice through the static. It's Santino Vitali. Crushing grief hits Elena. She's never heard her dead father's voice before this exact moment. Feels. She thought a simple recording couldn't break her. She was profoundly wrong. His voice is deep, measured, thick with that old country dialect. A heartbreaking realization hits her. She sounds exactly like him. She covers her shaking mouth. He speaks to a nervous FBI handler. The agent states the date, November 14th, 1984, 10 months before they murdered him. Feels. Listen to this with me. The tape is an archive, exposes the underworld, names, dates, supply lines. He explains Vulov buying immunity with rival blood. Then the breaking point. Santino names when his boss marked him. He'll move against me within the year, he says, totally detached. He knew the mob's cycle demanded his execution. Feels. I'm making this recording as insurance. I refuse federal protection. I have a daughter arriving in 3 months. I need the truth to outlive me. The tape clicks off, suffocating silence. Marco exhales. That's enough to bury him. Lorenzo folds his arms, radiating dark rage. That's enough to bury him 10 times over. His eyes are already digging Volov's grave. Eels. The tragedy is staggering. Every Don jailed in 1985 fell because Volov turned informant. He used feds to clear rivals, Lorenzo says. Your dad was the sacrifice. Elena sees the rot. Frame the consigliere, let feds clean house, take the crown. He's ruled a stolen empire for 20 years, he scowls. She stares at the cassette, a dead man's desperate gift. Eels. We're watching a perfect revenge take shape. Elena sees her father's love was just hidden ledgers left to keep her alive. Clutching the cassette, she's ready to burn this syndicate down. She asks when service starts. Marco says 8. Volov arrives at 7:30. Predators always claim their space early. Eels. You and I are watching a tragedy unfold. Elena visualizes a flawlessly brutal from the kitchen. Fingering her name, she hungers to stand over Volov, establishing dominance before he even registers the threat. Pure, chilling power. Captivated, Lorenzo murmurs it is either raw genius or certain death. Elena softly replies it can be both, as a grim shadow of a smile touches his lips. Eels. The gears of war turn. Directs Marco to disguise the gunman in stark Chef Whites, locking the restaurant down like a tomb before Volov arrives. Marco questions Salvatore's role. Lorenzo replies his father will play the wounded lion, carrying the heavy scars of mourning. They spend hours building this trap. While Lorenzo arranges the incoming violence, Elena sits in dim light, etching that crime ledger into her very bones. Eels. She memorizes every date and blood-soaked payout. Under the harsh light, Lorenzo slides a coffee across the table. His eyes carry the weight of the dead, issuing a bleak warning. If Volov falls tonight, the price is absolute. Her protective shadows will burn away. The mask drops, leaving her true identity exposed to the syndicates forever. Eels. The syndicates will know Santino's daughter survived, carrying their darkest secrets. Her quiet existence shatters. Lorenzo studies the subtle tension in her jaw, asking what she truly desires after the blood dries. Elena hesitates. The camera pushes in as she imagines her family's ruined Sicilian vineyard. She just wants peace, desperate to outrun this suffocating generational cycle of murder. Eels. She longs to simply breathe in the sun. Then, Lorenzo shatters her entire reality. He reveals his father bought that exact Sicilian estate decades ago, driven by agonizing survivor's guilt. It belongs to her. Elena goes completely rigid. Lorenzo confesses Salvatore spent 23 years tearing the city apart, haunted by Santino's dying mention of a daughter. She was entirely invisible. Eels. A tragic irony hangs in the room. She found him first. For 3 years, she poured wine for the very monsters who butchered her family. The past always catches up. But rather than breaking under the trauma, Elena sharpens her sorrow into a blade. She tells Lorenzo it is time. He slowly nods, carrying the crushing sorrow of his father, bracing for a night of absolute, merciless focus. Eels. He grips her trembling hand for 3 agonizing seconds before rising to ignite the slaughter. In the dining room, the atmosphere is thick, choking the panicked staff as they prepare for the city's deadliest predators. The dim lighting paints a beautifully mournful portrait. At 7:22, Elena pushes through the swinging doors in her worn uniform. The head chef freezes, staring as if a phantom just stepped out of the shadows. Eels. Benoit stammers that she was fired. Elena cuts him off, her voice like ice demanding bread and oil. Locking onto his terrified eyes, she delivers a haunting warning. No matter the screams tonight, the staff must hide. Shaking, Benoit begs to know who she really is. A tragic, knowing smile touches her lips. Just the waitress. Gripping her tray, she steps into the crowded dining room. Eels. The syndicates filter in, sinking into their velvet thrones. Elena drifts between them like a vengeful spirit, pouring crimson wine, waiting for the architect of her suffering. Volov finally swaggers through the entrance at 7:34, dragging the shadows in with him. He radiates the sickening arrogance of a man who believes he is a god. He claims the center table while his armed guards seal the exits. Eels. Volov's massive ego makes the service staff completely invisible to him, a fatal blind spot Lorenzo counted on. Then Salvatore enters. The aging Don looks hollowed out, physically crushed by the weight of his dead friend's confession. He slumps into his seat in a heavy morning silence that shifts the room's temperature. Hidden in the dim light, Elena watches Volov laugh at some cruel joke, carelessly tossing back his vodka. Eels. Volov sits there, drunk on his own false victory. But you and I see the bigger picture. The trap is already breathing. Lorenzo's gunmen wait in the wings. Every exit is locked dead. Elena carries her father's ghost in her pocket, feels, holding the devastating sins of the entire mafia. Hearing Santino's unnervingly calm voice echoing in her memory, her profound sorrow hardens into steel. Fingers strangling the tray, she marches straight to Vulov's table and shatters the quiet, feels, slamming the bread down, a beautifully reckless act of defiance. Feels. The sharp crack forces his attention. Volov glances up. The camera lingers for 2 agonizing seconds as his mind registers the ghost standing over him.
You can physically see the blood drain from his face.
Elena stares into his terrified eyes, utterly devoid of warmth, announcing that dinner is served on behalf of Santino Vitali. She slowly lifts the polished silver dome. No food, just the black ledger, a cassette, and a dead fish. A masterpiece of poetic vengeance. Feels. Volov's skin turns to ash. His thick fingers begin to tremble uncontrollably. Stepping back, Elena lets her voice drift through the suffocating quiet. She whispers a phrase in Old Italian, the ancient, unforgiving toll for a traitor. The entire room turns to ice. Let's pause and feel the sheer psychological weight here. Every hardened crime lord sitting at those tables suddenly felt the razor's edge of her grief, pressing against their throats. Feels. The air vanished the second she aimed her finger at the architect of her family's destruction. Like a judge reading a death sentence, she exposed the massive betrayal. Feels. She detailed how Volov sold their smuggling routes to federal agents back in 1983 and how he butchered Santino Vitali simply to bury his treason. 20 years of ruling a kingdom built on blood. Volov scrambled up, Feels, his voice cracking as he screamed for her execution. Nobody moved, not an inch. Then the kitchen doors exploded outward. Lorenzo stepped into the light, pumping a shotgun, flanked by 6 armed men. The waiters dropped their trays and pulled steel. Feels. The jaws of the trap snapped completely shut. Feels. The kings of the underworld sat completely paralyzed. Lorenzo slid the heavy tape player toward Caruso, a rival Don who bled away 14 months in a federal cage back in 1986 because of bad intel. Lorenzo told him to press play. Feels. Setting the stage, a recording from November 14, 1984. Santino's voice naming Dmitry Volov over and over. Caruso stared at the plastic buttons, locked his terrifying gaze onto the traitor, and slammed his hand down. Feels. The agonizing confession of a murdered father echoed off the dark mahogany walls. Feels. Elena watched raw, unadulterated terror devour the man who destroyed her childhood. You could practically see his mind violently snapping as he realized a dead man's ghost had been poisoning his empire since 1984. Feels. The god of the Mafia was finally choking on the exact helplessness he fed his victims. Yet Elena felt no rush of victory, just a deep, aching psychological stillness. The curse was finally lifting. The moment the tape clicked off, Feels. Caruso lifted the machine and violently shattered it against the heavy wooden table. Feels. Caruso held a horrifyingly dead stare on Volov. It wasn't explosive anger, but the crushing realization that he rotted in a cell to protect a rat. He softly asked if his own name lived in those federal files. Trapped by loaded guns, Feels. Volov looked at Elena, who stood like stone amidst the chaos. He pathetically whispered that it was just business, a fake coward's excuse. Then, Salvatore stood. Dragging his leg across the marble, the broken Don stopped before Elena, Feels, staring at her like she was his murdered brother resurrected. Feels. Salvatore lifted a heavy steak knife, offering her the ultimate bloody revenge for Santino. Elena stared at the serrated edge, flashing back to that lonely fake grave in Queens. Feels. She thought of her grandmother scraping together $50 a year for 3 decades just to keep a secret breathing. Her hand closed around the grip. But instead of flesh, she drove the blade viciously down into the solid mahogany table. Feels. The brutal thud cracked like thunder, stealing the breath from every killer in the room. Feels. There is a poetic tragedy in true power. It often lies in walking away. Elena swept her eyes over the assembly and declared she wasn't a butcher. She carried the true Vitali legacy, blood far too pure to stain with a coward's life. Feels. Holding the gaze of every apex predator at those tables, men who finally saw the naked truth, she offered the traitor up to them. Turning her back on Volov, she walked slowly toward Lorenzo. Behind her, Feels. The room exploded into a deafening symphony of violence as 5 enraged syndicates tore their pound of flesh. Feels. She never even blinked at the sickening sounds of destruction. To genuinely end a cycle of slaughter, you must let the fire burn itself out. Lorenzo caught her in his arms, gripping her tight to anchor her shattered nerves to the earth. Feels. He whispered that the 20-year nightmare was finally dead. As those ruthless men screamed her father's name with newfound honor, the estate key weighed heavy in her pocket. Yet, looking up at him, she said the tragedy wasn't quite over. Feels. One last profound emotional debt had to be paid. Feels. You and I have seen revenge stories, but here the emotional climax strikes at the bone.
She looked at Salvatore.
An old dawn blinking out of a 20-year nightmare, and whispered that she would finally take him to his brother's resting place.
As
The pale dawn broke, they walked through St. Michael's Cemetery in Queens, 4 quiet huts of drifting through the fog. They halted at a neglected headstone in row 7, etched with the name of a complete stranger. Feels. The chipped, weathered granite read Giovanni Ferraro, 1948 to 1985. Beloved and remembered. Her grandmother carefully chose those exact words to bury their agonizing trauma in plain sight. Feels. Because Santino truly was loved. Elena stood there, completely numb. Over her entire life, she had only dared to visit this sacred spot 3 times, always right before sunrise. She had memorized every jagged crack in that stone. Feels. Every dead patch of grass. The suffocating psychological weight of that fake grave was as intimate as the beating of her own heart. Feels. The exhausted boss leaned his trembling weight onto his cane, staring down at the physical proof of a monstrous lie. In that crushing moment, he finally understood the agonizing, soul-destroying toll of hiding a murdered brother for 3 decades. Feels. Salvatore stood completely paralyzed, and Elena simply let him drown in the sorrow. The absolute silence of a graveyard is just how trauma speaks to the dead. When his cracked voice finally pierced the morning frost, whispering Santino's name, Feels, the terrifying mobster armor fell away. He was just a weeping old man, broken by the weight of a 30-year illusion. Feels. He confessed to the earth itself. He admitted that tearing down his best friend's life was his deepest regret. Speaking right into the dirt, he told Santino that his little girl was standing right there, with his eyes and her grandmother's steel. Feels. He called her the bravest person he'd ever met, standing strong against a room full of loaded guns. Watching this hardened criminal beg for mercy, Elena finally felt a lifetime of inherited pain wash away. She reached down, Feels, pressing her bare hand flat against the freezing stone. Feels. She made a quiet promise to the grave. She would come back with a new headstone, carving his real name so the world would finally know the truth. They drove away in the early morning light, but Salvatore was completely silent. The old man reached back and gently squeezed her knee. Coming from a ruthless mob boss, that single silent gesture held the weight of 1,000 apologies. It said everything a broken father figure could never bring himself to say out loud. Feels. We have to ask ourselves, what is the real cost of revenge? Elena held his hand as they crossed the water, finally finding her peace.
But the fallout was violently fast.
When 5 mafia families want you gone,
You just vanish. His entire crew dissolved in 72 hours. Betrayed by his own people, his crew ran straight to the police to save themselves.
it was an absolute tragedy unfolding in real time. Pure karma, handed down by the very machine he built. Feels. The aftershocks from that night tore through the city's underbelly. Dirty cops lost their badges and pensions overnight. The docks were swept clean, and working men finally got the wages stolen from them. And Vulov? Feels. Elena never even asked how his story ended. She left him trapped at a table, surrounded by the very wolves he raised. For her, that bloody chapter was closed for good. Meanwhile, Lorenzo's lawyers moved like ghosts through the courts. Within 2 weeks, Feels. Elena claimed what was hers, $52 million, a quiet, dusty farm in Palermo, and most importantly, a completely clean legal name, finally honoring the heavy burden she had carried in the dark since she was just a kid. Feels. Picture the framing here. A quiet Tuesday morning in the Hamptons. Elena sat with her coffee, reading through the dark history of her new mafia empire. She took in every single crime, shut the folder, and looked up. Lorenzo was watching her with this heavy, Feels, piercing look, trying to read her mind. Well, he asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. The dock workers fund. Move the money today, not tomorrow, right now. Lorenzo paused. Elena, that is $11 million. She didn't even blink. Feels. I know exactly where that money came from, she said. I know the families who buried their sons in '85 because someone talked. Feels. Those men suffered the most. They get paid first, she said, her voice dead steady. Then the Ridgewood School, then the hospital. We will figure out the rest later. Lorenzo just watched her balance the scales. What about the property in Palermo? Feels. The deed cleared on Friday. Elena nodded slowly. I know nothing has grown on that land in 20 years. Lorenzo pushed back. The house is falling apart, Elena. The roof is completely caved in. She just stared at him. It was that cold. Feels. Unbreakable look she had mastered. The kind of heavy silence that kills an argument without saying a single word. Feels. Lorenzo gave in to the tension in the room. I know exactly what I am doing, Elena whispered. I want the dirt, the sweat. I want to grow something clean, knowing nobody bled for that soil. She let out a long breath. Feels. I want to bake bread in a place where the wind smells like lemons. That means everything to me. Lorenzo stood up and walked over here to her. As the morning light washed over his face, you could see the monster fade away. Feels. This was the real man beneath the mobster myth, just a quiet ghost haunting empty kitchens, rainy cars, and silent graves. Feels. I sat down with the bosses yesterday, he told her. I told them the war is done. The Moretti family is going totally clean. Reaching inside his coat, he added, I told them the Prince of New York is out for good. Elena froze. You actually said that? Feels. I meant it. And then, with this crushing, beautiful sincerity, Lorenzo dropped to one knee. He opened a velvet box to show a vintage 1920s platinum ring. A quiet survivor of family tragedy, just like the two of them. It was my grandmother's. Feels, he whispered. She always said the best things grow from the oldest dirt. Feels. Elena looked from the ring down to the man holding it. This was the ruthless enforcer who threw himself off a roof to keep her safe. The guy who hooped her through a bleeding city. The crime boss who poured his heart out by a fake grave. The king who watched her burn his dark empire to ashes, yet still looked at her like a queen. I am done being a boss, Lorenzo whispered. It was so raw. Just the broken, honest truth of a man finally letting his guard drop. I want to be a husband. Feels. I want to wake up in Palermo, he begged. I want to fix that roof. I want to fail at growing grapes until I finally figure it out. I want our house to smell exactly like your grandmother's kitchen. He looked up at her, totally stripped of his armor. Feels. Elena Vitali, let me be the man you never have to run from. Elena closed her eyes. She remembered being 7 years old, listening to secrets in the dark. The hidden key, her dad's confession tape, the fake names on freezing headstones. Feels. Those ghosts were finally at peace. Her real life was just starting. Feels. Elena answered in the only way that made sense for this beautiful story. Tu sei l'aria che respiro, she whispered. You are the air I breathe. A real, completely unguarded smile broke across Lorenzo's face, washing away the cold mob boss forever. Feels. Is that a yes? He asked quietly. Yes, she laughed. And when you and I watch this scene, that laugh is pure freedom. You can actually feel 20 years of pain melting away in the sun. He pulled her in, and the tension finally broke. Feels. Off in the background, Arthur was crying, and Marco was cheering them on. Feels. Over in the corner, Don Salvatore quietly tore a piece of bread, dipped it in oil, and raised a silent glass. In the Mafia, breaking bread is a blood oath. Jump forward 3 months. The camera finds Elena inside a stone farmhouse in Palermo. Feels. Her hands are covered in flour, and a sweet lemon breeze pulls at the curtains. Outside, Lorenzo is cursing at a broken roof, realizing that redemption actually takes hard work. The yard is just dirt and hope. Inside, Feels. Elena traces her grandmother's recipe book. Not the original, the mob burned that one in Queens, chasing ghosts. Feels. Elena was rewriting the whole thing from memory. Every single measurement perfectly restored by a mind that never forgot a thing. She finally had nothing but time. Pressing her flour-covered hand flat on the paper, she left a white handprint. Feels. A physical mark, just like her grandmother used to leave. It was proof she belonged to a family of survivors. Stick with me here. You and I know she didn't find this happy ending by accident. Feels. She earned every bit of this piece because an old woman hid a key in a coffee can for 30 years. She left bread on a fake grave and whispered survival secrets to a scared little girl. Feels. That old, beautiful language was alive again. The bread was warm in the oven. The endless, bloody cycle of the Mafia was finally shattered. And the real feast? It was just starting.